Hey.
Yeah. Hey everyone. Welcome to our Vercel community live stream. My name is Jacob Paris, and I'm joined here with Amy from the Vercel community team. We're streaming this live out to X and to YouTube, but if you want to participate in the chat, come on into our community at community.vercel.com and click going on the event, which will unlock the chat in the sidebar where you can chat and ask questions. At the end of the session, we're going to have some time for Q&A, so you can feel free to drop any questions along that you have along the way.
And if you're going to hang out with us in the chat, just remember to be respectful and please follow our code of conduct. If you're comfortable sharing where you're at, we love to see where everyone's tuning in from around the globe, so feel free to share that. And with all of that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest, Jeff Everhart. He's Developer Relations at Knock. Welcome, Jeff, to the stage here.
You are muted. Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thanks for coming on. What do you have for us today here?
Yeah, so I've got a number of different things I'd like to talk about related to Knock. So Knock is infrastructure for sending product and customer messaging. And so we've got a couple of cool new features in beta around agents that I'd like to get into.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's give you the stage.
Cool. All right, so thanks so much. Again, my name is Jeff Everhart, and I am on the developer relations team here at Knock. And we are basically a notification service that we built so you don't have to. To give you a little bit of background into Knock, I think everybody loves a good founder story when it comes to a startup, so I always like to start with ours. So our two founders, Sam and Chris, led product and engineering at a video collaboration company called Collab.io. This was eventually acquired by Adobe, but they spent a number of years building and scaling the notification system for that platform. And when that company got acquired, they really wished that something like Knock had existed when they were trying to build out those features for Collab.io. So they spun those ideas out into their own company. And so when Knock started, we were originally kind of built around being this best-in-class transactional notification platform that helps teams scale their work. But realize the technical teams and other people who care about craft are underserved by some of the other tools in this customer engagement space. So we're definitely in the process of expanding our product surface area. So at the heart of our product is this workflow builder, which I'll dive into in a little bit. But we also offer basically like data normalization across all of your different channels. So in a channel in Knock can be anything like in-app, SMS, email, push, webhooks, chat apps like Slack or Microsoft Teams. So we sort of handle collecting all of your data across all of those channels and normalizing it all so that you can use it to inform your product roadmap. We also offer a lot of features around template management. So traditionally, when you're doing transactional email or SMS, those templates, the language of those templates might be stored in a code base. So we surface that in a visual template editor to make it a little bit easier for people to interact with across the organization. We also ship with an out-of-the-box preference management system. And then we've got a bunch of other features that are really specific to developers and observability that I think differentiate Knock from some of the other players in this space. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that we're in the process of kind of expanding our tool set, if you will, into different areas of messaging that any one organization could want to do. So at the heart, I mentioned our workflow engine, but we've also got this new product called Guides, which is basically in product messaging. So think about announcements, banners, cards, modals, things like that, things that you would want to show a user inside of your product. That are going to look and feel like a native part of your product. We've also got this new feature called Broadcast, which is basically a way to use the workflow engine to do one-time messaging in a more easy way, right? So having non-technical people come in and send out promotional blasts of emails or SMS messages to an audience of users. And then I know that AI is like the total buzzword in the tech industry right now. So we definitely have some AI features, and that's kind of part of what I'm going to talk about today. So I figured kind of like I was going to break down today's demo into two different parts. And so the first part, I'm just going to kind of do like a high level overview of Knock and talk about some of the kind of core features. And then in the second part, I'd love to focus a little bit more on the AI aspect and dig into our MCP server, and our agent toolkit. So if that's cool, I'm just going to sort of reorganize my resources a little bit, and then let's get rolling. And what we'll do first is let's hop into this application called Collab.io. So Collab.io is an app that we use to demo a lot of Nock's different features. I think collaboration apps are one of the things that tend to send, a high volume of notifications. And so what I wanted to get started with is maybe just adding like a basic in-app feed component to this application. And we'll do this and sort of show you kind of the basics of how Nock works and talk about some of those like foundational transactional features that I mentioned. So awesome. So I'm here in this user profile component, and I'll just sort of reorganize my windows just a little bit. So I'm here in this user profile component. We can see this rendering up in the top right. And this seems like a great place to go ahead and drop an in-app feed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to head out to the Nock docs, head over to the building in-app UI section. We'll come down and just grab a code snippet for this feed component. So we'll just snag this, and then we can come down in our component right here. And then we'll also grab this use state and use ref code and pop that above in our return statement. And then obviously we're going to need to add a couple of imports here. So we'll go ahead and just add a bunch of these different imports from React and then the Nock Labs React package. And then once we do that, if we go ahead and save and hop back into Collab.io, we should see now that we have this sort of fully featured notification feed component rendering. And now Nock provides all of the backend infrastructure for sending in-app messages like this. So I think what we can do here is just sort of walk through that whole process from triggering a particular workflow to what different steps are inside of a workflow to sort of see how all of this stuff knits together. Okay, so in my app, I'm already rendering my component. Now, what we would want to do traditionally for a lot of this transactional stuff is these workflows are triggered by events in our app. So if we come over into our create new comment server action, we can see some of that at work here. So I'm importing the Nock Labs React package, and we're just using this workflows.trigger function. We're going to pass in the key of the workflow that we want to trigger. And there's a couple of different properties that we would want to pass into this workflow trigger, just depending on how we want these messages to be resolved. So we can pass in an actor, which is typically, the person who's doing an action, right? So if I'm creating a new comment, the actor is the person leaving the comment. Then we can specify any recipients that we want. And here I'm just pulling basically all of the people in this workspace to be recipients. And then we can pass in some actual data about the comment, like the comment properties itself, asset ID, project ID, and so on. And so what we can do from there is obviously that is going to make a request to Nock's REST API to trigger that particular workflow. And so let's go ahead and jump into the Nock dashboard and look at what that workflow looks like a little bit before we kind of like add some comments and run this from end to end. So here we're in the Nock dashboard. I'm already on my workflows tab. And so I'll open up this create new comment workflow. And here we've got a number of different tabs. We've got like an overview, logs, workflow runs, and commits, which I'll sort of dive into as we continue. Okay, so here I'm going to actually open up the workflow canvas and we'll edit these steps. And this is what it looks like to build a Nock workflow. And so I think a lot of people mistake Nock and hear the word workflow and it's an overloaded term and think of generalized workflow, which isn't always the case, right? Our workflows tend to be really specific to these notification primitives. So we can see here that we're triggering this with an API call. And then we have two different types of steps that we can include on our workflow. We have these, what we call function steps, and then we have channel steps. So function steps obviously do some sort of function as a part of workflow execution. So we've got things like delays, which are pretty self-explanatory, batching, which means that we're catching multiple events and condensing them down into one notification. We can fetch stuff. So if you need to, post data to an external system to cause a side effect, or get data from an API endpoint to enrich your workflow data, you can do either of those things. Branching, obviously, it kind of if-else logic that we could encode into these visual workflows. And then throttling, which throttling basically allows you to specify a particular limit on notifications you might want to send. So if you had like a really noisy alert system and you only wanted to send one notification every 5 minutes, you throw a throttle on it. And then that way you can continue to send your events, but we're only really producing one notification. Obviously, the channel steps kind of a little bit more self-explanatory. But one of the cool things that we can do in Knock is that when we trigger a workflow, all of the steps are aware of one another and can reference each other. So here, if you kind of like follow along with what we're doing, so we're triggering this every time somebody leaves a comment in Collab.io, right? So if I come into a project and look at, the Dino DNA sequencer by Dr. Ellie Sattler, and I leave a comment here, right? Each comment is going to trigger that workflow one time for a particular recipient. So what we're going to do there is we're going to open up a batch window, and we can, encode some logic on that as well. And so what we're doing here is we're opening a batch per recipient and per asset ID so that, we're catching all of the comments made on one asset for 60 seconds. And then really only one event is going to come out of that batch. We're going to catch all these activities and then condense them down into this in-app notification step. Where we'll go ahead and we can send this, and then we can hop in and look at what this looks like. So again, I mentioned template management at the beginning, and that's a big part of what Knock does, is giving people the ability to visually preview what their notifications are going to look like. And so here is what this in-app step looks like. And so here we've got the ability to edit it. We've got a real-time preview. And then over here on the left is basically all of the data variables that are accessible to you as a part of this workflow run. So you can see here, this is some of the stuff that I would have passed in as a part of my data payload over here inside of my workflow trigger. We've also got properties on a recipient, properties on an actor, and then we've got our batch activities, which we can use to list out some of those things. But I also noticed while I was in here that we've got kind of like an incorrect pluralization of this comments thing. So let's go ahead and fix that and sort of look at how Knock works in action on this. So I'm going to hop over to the docs again, and we'll go to designing workflows, template editor. I'm going to open up our liquid helpers because again, part of what we tried to do with the template editing aspect of Knock is normalize all of this stuff. Because if you have an email templating solution that uses something like Mustache or Handlebars, and you're using a separate templating language for your SMS, it can be kind of difficult to remember all those rules, and especially exposing those templates to non-technical users. So we use Liquid for everything, and all of your templates use the same templating language. So we'll go ahead and copy this pluralize function, and we can bring it over into our workflow. And basically what we're going to do here is we're going to look at total activities. And you can see here as I type, I get some really nice type ahead stuff. And so we're going to do, total activities is going to be comment. And then we'll say, comments if it is plural. And cool. We can see now that, we're displaying the kind of correct variation of that. And then if we come over here and edit the number of activities stored inside of that variable, the template responds accordingly. Now, what I'm going to do now is sort of show you a little bit more of Knock's functionality. So one of the things that we were built on is the idea of environments. And if you look at what some people complain about for like marketing tools, it's that kind of everything is done in production. And, there's not a lot of guardrails around shipping notifications. And so that was something that we tried to address with our own built-in version system. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click Save Changes. And then you'll see that that enables this commit button up here. And so we're built around both the idea of having separated logical environments, but also needing to actually commit those changes to a particular environment. So when I click commit, we'll bring up this nice visual diff where we can see, okay, here's what the template looked like before, here's what it looked like after. And then I can even put a nice commit message. So what did we do? We fixed plural logic. And then I'm going to go ahead and commit that to my development environment. And so that's also one of those things, like to make this available over the API, we need to go ahead and commit those things. Okay, so cool. So that kind of gets us into the template. Let's go ahead and hop back out here and let's look a little bit deeper into our workflow. So, right, we're sending that in-app message, then we're going to delay for 30 minutes. And if we hop down to our postmark step, we can see that there's one condition on here. And again, I mentioned at the beginning of this like sort of workflow editor tour that all of the different steps in a workflow are aware of one another and can reference one another. And so this is one of those ways that you can use Knock to create really nuanced workflows, because ultimately, right, if a user sees something like a comment in an in-app feed, do they really need an email about it? And in most cases, the answer is no. And what people generally default to is we jokingly call it fire at will, right? Where I have all these different notification channels and I just send all of the messages to all the channels at once, even though that results in a bunch of duplicate messages that might induce notification feed for your users. So what this condition allows me to do is basically I can look back at my in-app feed step and check whether or not it's been read, right? So I send an in-app message, delay for 30 minutes, and then look if it's been read. And then if it hasn't, then I'll send the email. And if it has, then this step is just skipped. So really kind of lets you create some cool stuff. But let's go ahead now, and then we've got all of our changes saved and committed. Let me pull up Firefox real quick, and let's go ahead and hop back out and add some comments. Cool. And we've got our notification feed there. So we'll hop back into Collab.io. And we're inside, just making sure we're inside of the same workspace. Okay, so cool. So let's give this a test. And again, I'm going to be tempting the live demo gods a lot today. So let's hope that it works. And if not, what we'll do is, we've got some great observability tools inside of Knock that we can default to. So cool. Let me just double check real quick that I got this running. I think I do. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and, I don't know, this looks like a great project. Very valuable. Good work. Okay. So we've added 3 comments. And again, what we're going to do is if we reference back to the workflow engine step, we're going to batch all those, right? So there's a reason we're not seeing all of those immediately. But what's kind of neat is if we hop back into the workflow and we come over here to workflow runs, and if we refresh, let's see. Did we catch them? 1347. Okay, cool. It looks like we've maybe sent some. Oh, and like I said, I tested the live demo gods. So, okay, cool. So we look at this, batch paused, and this is what we did. So we sent 3. There we go. Okay. So what we've done is we've got all these individual messages, and then we can see here that each one of these is paused for a recipient. That's because basically when we add messages to a batch, some of them sort of get completed immediately. And then the first message that opens the batch window generally gets paused until it ultimately closes. So cool. So we can hop back into our app and see, Knock handled all of that real-time WebSocket infrastructure for you, and that we get, hey, Jeff, people have left 3 comments on that particular asset, right? Using that template that we already created. And now what we can do is with the in-app feed component, the default in-app feed component for Knock, we can basically manage state on this using Knock, right? So if we wanted to archive this notification, mark it as read, we can do that. We can also archive it. And so Knock handles managing all of that state for you. Cool. So let me shift gears a little bit. And I think that gives you kind of like a good introduction to some of what Knock provides. And I'll actually hop in here too, because I think this is kind of a neat feature. So we're really, again, built around observability. One of the things that Knock serves best is really large teams. And so we have a support role that's a dedicated role in Knock. That means that support folks can come into Knock and basically walk through different workflow triggers, workflow executions, and figure out why somebody did or didn't get an email. So if you're answering those questions a lot, or you're having an engineer go in and look at, SendGrid logs or something to figure out why this person got an email, that's something that Knock helps you answer really well. And so here we can see that basically we can trace through this individual workflow run and look at everything at each step. So here we can come in, see the in-app message. We can look at the in-app message that was generated, look at its delivery status, preview the individual message, look at any provider logs, and even like a timeline of what's happened with that message. So when was it created? When was it sent? When was it delivered? How have people interacted with it after the fact? So very cool observability features kind of baked into Nock from the get-go. Awesome. So let me hop back into Collab.io a little bit. We'll close out Firefox. I don't think we'll need it for the rest of this demo. But there are a couple of other things that I wanted to call out. So like in addition to this in-app feed component, we've also tried to componentize other aspects of the notification stack that kind of help you implement different channels a little bit more easily. So one of the things that's been kind of historically difficult is creating a Slack app or creating a Microsoft Teams app. And so we actually have some components that we've created that allow you to do that in a much more streamlined way. So this is called our Slack Kit component. And this basically facilitates the OAuth process, storing a token for Slack back in Nock so that you can basically take your Slack bot feature development from like a week down into maybe like a day, couple of hours, just depending on how quickly you can implement this stuff. The other thing that I talked about a little bit on the overview page was the idea of preferences. And so this is kind of what a preference set might look like for a user. This isn't interactive right now, so it's just kind of here for explanation purposes. But the idea is that we provide really granular preferences that you as the developer of your app can expose to your users. So here you see like, notification type, comments and mentions, project updates. Users can opt out of an entire channel type of notifications. They can opt out at a workflow level or a workflow category level. And then we also have this more advanced model called conditions where you could set like a threshold. So like if I wanted to say, I don't want to get notified until, I exceed 75% of my billing quota, that's something that you could encode into a Nock preference set that would be automatically evaluated during every workflow execution. So some really cool stuff there. And then I'm going to hop back out to the docs and just talk through like a couple of cool things that I think, let me refresh this. I was having some issues with some of the modals. So I'm just going to refresh that before I forget. And so I mentioned at the beginning, right, that we're really trying to be a developer first company. And so pretty much everything that I showed you that you could do through the UI, like creating new workflows, creating workflow steps, templates, all of that, you can do that using our CLI or the management API. So if you wanted to do more of this in code, that is definitely something that's on the table. And because we are built around those really flexible API primitives, it kind of serves really well as this transition into like an MCP first or agentic first world. And so that's kind of some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about next. So under developer tools, we've got kind of two things there. We've got our MCP server, and then we also have our agent toolkit. And there's a reason why I think we're really well suited to do some of this stuff. And again, it's because like we are very API first, right? Everything that you can do in the UI, you can do through an API. So it means that it exposes that really well to MCP tools or agents who want to, help you create your different messaging. And then I think there's also sort of one other reason that I'll talk about a little bit that has kind of nothing to do with Nock, but just has to do with the idea of agents sending messages, kind of our thesis around that. So let me open up this blog post because I think it's kind of a good illustration of what can happen when you give agents carte blanche communication capabilities. So this is a really great blog post by Simon Willison on, this lethal trifecta for AI agents. If you give them access to private data, untrusted content, meaning you're allowing users to directly prompt the model, and then external communication tools, you're setting yourself up to basically have, a really bad security incident. And so obviously Nock doesn't address all of these things, but it does address giving agents the ability to communicate externally. And so when you think about what that looks like, right? If I want my agent to send emails, how am I going to do that? Do I just give it access to the Gmail tool and allow it to create its own template? Like obviously that opens yourself up to a lot of security holes like this. And also just from my perspective, having worked with a bunch of different agents using our MCP tool, agents are non-deterministic systems. So I give it the same input and it's going to give me different output each time. So that's not something we probably want to have in a lot of our customer communications. And so obviously you saw with Knock, we have the ability to create these messaging pathways using a bunch of different channels, using a bunch of different logical function steps, and also that governance model, right? I'm specifying what this data payload looks like. Here are the places where the parts of that data payload are used to construct message templates. And then there's a human review process to say, hey, I like this messaging. I don't like this messaging. This template looks good. It doesn't look good. So that's kind of one of the reasons we moved really quickly onto the agent toolkit, is because we believe there's not really another company out there like with that particular focus. I think you have a lot of point providers like you can think of. I'm sure there's lots of email tools or SMS tools, but not one tool that's going to simultaneously combine all of those different channels, but then also give the organization the tools that they need to like handle that messaging effectively. So that's kind of why we built it. I'll definitely, tweet this article out again after this, maybe post it in the thread on this event if you want to go read it. It's a really good read, and Simon's just a great thinker on the LLM space. So we'll go ahead and close this down, and then I'll actually get into showing you a little bit more about how Agent Toolkit and the MCP server work. And if you didn't already get to reference, we're big into Jurassic Park references. So Collab.io helps you build your hopefully safe dinosaur theme park. Okay. So let's hop back into Collab.io, and then I added last night in just a really basic agent that we can go and take a look at, and his name is T-Rex because I couldn't think of anything better. So let's take just a second to check out how this works. So let's just say, how can you help me? And we'll start there. I'm just going to think for a second, and then we'll kind of look at the code behind this. All right, so it's our Collab.io assistant. Can help us with a number of different things. And I built this agent basically using most of the stuff from the Vercel AI SDK. So let me close down a couple of my, oh, wow. See, my tab management's terrible. Sorry, folks. It just keeps going, huh? All right, cool. So we'll just stick here in this route.ts file because that's basically the meat of it. And then we'll also open up our chat agent. Okay. All right. So our chat agent just uses this use chat hook to send messages back to this API route that's going to pretty much just pass along those messages to this Anthropic model. And you can see here, I've given it a really basic system prompt. And right now we have no tools exposed to it. So that's something that we can change using the Knock Agent Toolkit. And so I'm going to show you sort of a couple of different things here. Like one, using the toolkit, obviously we can expose different pieces of the Knock API to an agent. So like if we wanted to create an agent to help us do work on our messaging, then we can also expose workflows as tools so that an agent can use them. Okay, so let's go ahead and explore the first part of that really quickly. So I'm back out on my developer tools page, and we'll just come over here to getting started. And then the Vercel AI SDK is really the first example up. And so I'm just going to copy some of these code samples and just drop them into my app here. And so we'll go ahead and just create a new toolkit. And we're going to do this inside of the API route, and I'll explain why that might make a little bit more sense in just a second. And then we'll go ahead and expose some of these user tools. So we've done that. And then, in this tools object, we just need to call toolkit.getTools, and we're just exposing basically a subset of the tools instead of all the tools. All right, so let's go back out to our agent and see if anything has changed. What tools do you have? And then hopefully this should tell us some stuff about managing users, and very cool. And let's double check right here. So yes, and we've got a kind of fine-grained permission system here. So we've given it management tools. I want to also give it read tools. So like, can you get info about a user? And we'll say, yeah, okay. It recognizes it's got new tools. So I can get information about a user, get a user's messages, get their user preferences. Cool. Let's hop back into Knock and let's head over to users. I think we're logged in as Alan Grant. So let's come over here and just copy his user ID for right now. And let's just say, yes, can you get me info for this user ID? And then we'll go ahead and paste that in there. Then hopefully, it's going to call the get user function, and it gives us a result of that tool call, and then spits some of that back out. So that's really cool, right? That's kind of the basics of how we would go about exposing these individual knock tools to an AI agent like that. So let's dig one layer deeper too, because I think there's something else cool, right? Obviously, like I'm logged into this application already, but I had to provide it an ID. So there's actually also a way that we can provide context to our agent when we configure that toolkit. So we're going to pass in a user ID and a tenant ID, which tenants in Knock are basically organizations, workspaces. A lot of people use the word tenant in a bunch of different ways to describe different levels of organizational hierarchy. So I don't know how exactly that's going to map to your app, but in this instance, like each one of these workspaces is basically a tenant. And what that allows you to do is you can provide a lot of tenant scoping on things. We can scope the feed to a tenant. We can provide tenant specific branding. So if we wanted, Engine's logo instead of the Collab.io logo to appear in emails, those are all things that we could do and swap out. And then you can also provide like tenant preference sets, right? So if a user wanted a particular preference set for Engine versus Masrani Global, that's something that they could do using Knock's tenancy features. So cool. So if we look at my chat agent, I'm actually already passing through a workspace ID and a user ID back into this API call. So here where we're getting messages, let's go ahead and actually move this down below this point where we extract messages. And so what we're going to do is also pull out user ID and workspace ID. And then we will pass those into our create knock toolkit function. So we'll just say user ID, and then we'll need to do tenant ID, and then we'll say workspace ID. And then now this should have a little bit more context about who the current user is. So if I refresh my agent here to clear out my messages, I can say something like, can you get me information about the current user? And we'll use my voice to text stuff, which I love. So if you're not on the Whisperflow train, highly recommend it. All right, let's fire this off and see if we get the right result. Okay, cool. And obviously, it used that user ID to get that particular result. So that's awesome. And obviously, we've got a bunch of other tools out here that we can expose if we come down to the tools reference. And all these tools are available for the agent toolkit and for the MCP server. And so what we'll actually do next is kind of the cool part, right? The agent communication part. And so what we'll do there is we're going to use this workflows as a tool concept. So this is going to allow us to create a particular workflow in Knock, and it is going to then allow us to expose that workflow as a tool to the agent so that the agent can use the workflow to communicate with users. So let's come in here and let's go ahead and add this to our permissions object. And I don't want to use any of these. I'm going to, again, tempt the live demo spirits here and try to use the MCP server to quickly create a workflow. So before we do that, I'm just going to double check my cursor settings to make sure. Let's see. No, come on. Tools and integrations. Where are we calling this? It feels like cursor updates every day now. Okay, so it looks like my Knock MCP server is good to go. So I'm going to come back over into the cursor agent and let's actually ask it to create us a new user invite workflow. So again, I'm going to use my voice to text real quick to do a quick prompt, and we'll say, can you create me a workflow called new user invite? It should have a single email step that invites a user to join Collab.io. You can go ahead and just create the body of that email for me. All right, so we've got our basic prompt there. Let's go ahead and fire it off and see what we get. And this is part of the fun for my job in doing all of these agent demos is like, you never really know exactly how it's going to work, what it's going to create. So I'm like 95% sure that we'll get there with this, but what it outputs is always just a little bit different. So if we fire off this prompt, it should recognize that I'm trying to call the create workflow tool, which it does. And I'll go ahead and just open that up. And here we can see, we're passing in a workflow key, a description, and then a category. And we'll go ahead and run that. And then it's going to list my email layouts to just kind of double check which layouts it should use. And then hopefully it should create or upsert an email step. And while it's doing that, I'm just going to grab a sip of water. Okay, calling upsert workflow email step. Let's see. And it looks like, all right, cool. We've got that. Provides a welcome message, includes a button for the recipient to attach the invitation, set up their account, all that stuff. Okay, awesome. So let's now just double check our agent's work. So boom, I saw it hop in there. All right, new user invite. If we come to edit steps, come into edit content, we can, let's go ahead and just close out this pane and see what that looks like in a much more readable way. Okay, cool. Like that's kind of what I would expect, right? From an agent, just creating me a welcome email from a workflow like this. And what we're finding is like, for a lot of people, notification systems tend to be a black box. They live all in code. And so they tend to be really huge migration efforts when you want to switch providers. But one of the things that we're seeing is that with the MCP server, because you're able to prompt this or even like have it look at your code base to do stuff with the MCP server, we're watching people like migrate so much faster. And it's just really, really cool to see. And it might not get you all the way there, but it gets you really close. And like, just from that, I could, add steps to that workflow, could have given it more steps in that workflow. And if we reference like the tools, we can see down here that we pretty much expose all of them. Right now, branching is a little complicated. We haven't yet figured out the prompting for that part of the MCP tool, but can create all these other steps, and it does it, mostly accurately. And then you can come in later and update some of this stuff. So again, yeah, we'll go ahead and commit this, and then we'll say initial commit from cursor and commit that to development. Cool. So now what we would want to do is let's see. Now we've created our workflow, right? So I think next step is we want to figure out how to allow the agent to trigger that workflow from this interface. And so what we would do here is I'm going to come back over here and copy the workflow key. And all we really need to do is just pass that into our knock agent toolkit config object. And then now that agent should have access to that particular workflow. So what we'll do here is let's go ahead and come over to users. I'm going to go ahead and find my user ID in this workspace. And then let's say, can you trigger the new user invite workflow for the user with this ID? And then we'll go ahead and paste in that user ID. And then hopefully, yeah, I'll just make sure our server's running. All right, cool. And double check that this is committed. New user invite, it is. All right, so let's fire it and see what we get here. All right, it's going to think. Oh, no. Okay, so let's see. We'll troubleshoot a little bit. Maybe we'll just refresh. Workflows, trigger, new user invite. Let's double check my keys. New user invite, that's committed. And it said it didn't have a tool. So let's try one more time. Can you trigger the new user invite workflow for the user with this ID? Okay, let's see what we're doing here. And this is always the trouble with doing live demos. Users manage, new workflow trigger. Let's see, new user invite. Let's just double check what we need our tool reference to look like. Workflows is tools. Let's also see, can you list me the tools you have available? See if this gives us any more information. Get user messages. Let's go ahead. I'm just going to try restarting the server. And then we'll run that query one more time. Let's double check. Work permissions, workflows. Did I put it in the right place? I did. Trigger, comment, updated. Workflows. Workflows, object, trigger. I don't know. Let's try some of these. So let's back out. We'll back up a step, and we'll try maybe one or two more things. And then if we can't get this to work, I will record a YouTube video of this working after the fact, and I will post it as a follow-up to this event. So we should be able to do read true. Let's see, manage true. And then let's go ahead and say trigger. All right, should be a string array. New user invite. Permissions. And then for this, I'm going to go ahead and just remove these. We'll see if that makes any difference. Okay, cool. And then we'll just, for safety's sake, restart our server and then come back out here. Refresh one more time. And we'll say something like, what workflow tools do you have available? Yeah. Permissions, workflows, manage, read true. Okay. Total bummer, because this was kind of the cool part. Oh, there we go. I knew it was a human error issue. So that's it. We were only exposing the user tools. All right. So let's try this one more time. And again, we've got a couple of different permission levels here. So we've got this permissions object. And then clearly also we have to tell the LLM or the model like exactly which tools we are passing in. So my sincere hope now is that this is all it was and this absolutely user error. So let's hit this one more time. Can you tell me what workflow tools you have available? All right, cool. Okay, there we go. Yep. So now we've got all of the workflow tools available. And as usual, it is not the machine. The machine is doing exactly what you tell it to do. And it is the user who is at fault. So let me hop back and let me grab my user ID again. And let's do this one more time. Okay, so can you trigger me the new user invite workflow using this user ID? All right, let's just double check that I actually new user invite. All right, yeah, let's go. Cool. Let's see. And hopefully we should get a workflow run ID back. All right, cool. And then it successfully generated that. All right, and then we should be able to come over into Knock and open up the new user invite. And then let's open up workflow runs, and very cool. We can see this added in here. And then if we click into here, we can even sort of preview the message. And the reason this is not sent, I'm turned my email provider into sandbox mode, so I'm not blasting out emails. But cool, we can see that that was sent exactly as we wanted it to. And I think one of the cool things, again, about like workflows, right, is that they're decoupled from the actual like agent sending it. So for example, if I wanted to come over into new user invite, well, again, tempt the live demo gods here, and I'm going to drag a Slack step over. And we'll go ahead and do this. And, hey, you've been invited to Collab.io. All right, we'll go ahead and we'll save, commit. So we'll add a Slack step. And since, let's say we'll need to actually come back in here. Let's add in our user ID and our workspace ID. So I took those out while troubleshooting. Cool. And so we'll pass in just user ID and then tenant ID. And I'll sort of talk with you a little bit about how some of this Slack stuff works in Knock. So obviously, like, we have an ID and Knock manages the in-app feed for you. So based on that user's ID, obviously email, things like SMS, use your email, your phone number. But a lot of the other channels that we work with have particular like token-based methods of gaining access to your account. So like Slack, you need a user token, a user ID. The push, for example, you need a device token. And so all of that stuff is stored in something called channel data on particular like objects in Knock, like users or tenants. So I've already got part of my Slack steps stored in Knock on that tenant, hopefully. And then we've also got some information stored on this user object. So if we click over here into channel data, we can see, for this Slack provider, we've got this user ID stored. So cool. So let's go ahead and give this a try, and we'll run this workflow one more time. Obviously, we've made those changes, committed them. And then we'll cross our fingers that if this works, and if not, like I said, we'll wrap up the demo, and then I will go ahead and record a video of it for posterity. Okay, so cool. So now what we should do is, if we trigger that same workflow again, we should get the same email step, but we should also get a Slack message. So I'm going to head back into Collab.io. And let's see if it remembers. So let's say all we should need to do is trigger this again. Actually, no, let's refresh, because we did change our Knock toolkit instance here. So let me copy this user ID one more time for my user in Knock. And then let's just clear out our agent's memory. And then, we'll do, can you trigger the new user invite for the user with this ID? All right, cool. And so hopefully we get a similar result. All right, we got a workflow run ID. It's been successfully triggered. And again, that doesn't necessarily tell us whether or not the individual channel steps have been successfully executed. So we can always hop back into Knock, open up our workflow runs tab, and then we should have a second workflow run. And we can see, boom, this is completed. And let's actually look at the message, and we can see it's delivered. And then hold on, let me bring over my Slack instance. And there we can see down at the bottom that new message that says, hey, Jeff, you've been invited to Collab.io. So awesome. I think in terms of demo stuff, that's really all I've got. So I appreciate you all hanging out with me today, checking out Knock, thinking about, obviously notification systems and how those can be used in conjunction with agents or tools like MCP servers, to do some cool stuff.
Amazing. Thank you, Jeff. That was
Awesome.
super cool to see.
Awesome.
I'm actually really impressed with the developer experience that you're showing there, especially with the way it's integrating with the AI SDK, like being able to create the tool, the Knock toolkit, and have all the permissions management and tenant ID and user ID and generate tools from there. I don't think I've actually seen anyone else do that before. Anytime I've been trying to build tools, it's like I've been handling that in each tool individually. And this just looks so much nicer and so much easier to actually be confident your tool calls are going to change. And you update something that's just updates immediately. And I'm like, I think I'm going to start building my apps this way.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, it is a very nice developer experience. Like, obviously there was the hiccup where I forgot exactly what tools I was passing in to the agent, which is another step, but I do think that's kind of like one of the things we tried to build into the model of agent toolkit is like, and again, why I bring up that article by Simon Willison, where it's like, you're giving a lot of power to a non-deterministic system that is very easily influenced by whatever the prompt is. So we really thought about like, what is it that we're exposing? How do we make it so that when developers use this, they're exposing like only the slices of this that they want to, and aren't like inadvertently exposing anything. So that feedback is, really appreciated.
Yeah, it was really cool to see. Another thing I was curious about is like, how does Knock the Knock dashboard get the workflows from the code base? Because it looks like you just prompted, you were saying, hey, make this workflow for me. And then you switch tabs to Knock, and all of a sudden it was in there. And that was super fast, but I don't know how that worked.
So that was the MCP server. So basically like all of those tools that we expose, the MCP server just uses our management API and, whatever sort of agentic, I guess like MCP client, right, is the term for that. Whatever MCP client you're using just manages all of those different API calls. And each one of those tool calls is a really detailed prompt around what those resources look like in code. And so like if you were to use the CLI, for example, basically like a workflow is just boils down to a JSON object where, you know, it sort of spells out, it's got a particular structure around the steps. And when we hit a channel step, here are the templates, here are what type the templates are, whether they're HTML or Markdown or whatever. And then, yeah, so that's really what that was the MCP server. And it feels kind of magical, honestly. And like that was a very simple example where, you know, I've done a couple of videos on the MCP server lately, and I did like a whole user invite flow where it was like, make me a workflow that sends an immediate email, delays for, you know, X amount of time, then sends another one and then delay, you know, so like you can really quickly build out a very robust workflow just with like natural language. So it's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, it looked like magic watching it happen.
Yeah, awesome.
If I wanted to do that by hand, I would essentially build out the JSON file and then use like a CLI command to push it to the knock backend.
Correct. Yeah. And we don't necessarily have a lot of people that do that. I think a lot of people will maybe start like, that's definitely something that we're working towards. Like there's still some kind of rough edges around the infrastructure as code kind of approach in Knock that we're working on, like, because there's not really the concept of branching. So you kind of can't work on anything in isolation, which is something we have an engineer going deep on right now. I do know, and I don't know how many customers we have who would like hand author the JSON, but you definitely could. And I think a lot of people will kind of like start and then pull the JSON into their local file system. And then from there, the whole commit environment promotion process is something that you could manage through the CLI.
I see. Yeah, and I really like that model. Like, it gives me a lot of confidence knowing that there is at least some representation of what's happening in the dashboard in a file that I have in code. So if the MCP server is generating this file for me, but then pushing it and automating all of that, that's great. If I wanted to drop down and do it manually, and you know, even if we didn't have the MCP server, but I ask Cursor to generate my file for me, and then I manually run the command, that also works for me as well.
And that actually is a very interesting aspect of this, and something we had a Slack thread on earlier today was like, you know, what obviously we have both approaches, right? And with agents and Cursor and something like that, they can operate across both of them. It's like, when does it make sense to use the MCP server versus when should I maybe pull this down into my local file system and then have, you know, Cursor operated on it in that area and then push it back up. And that gives you a lot of flexibility, just kind of depending on, you know, I guess the complexity of your workflow. And there's still a couple of areas that the MCP server doesn't cover yet. So like branching workflows, especially if they're kind of like multiple branches or nested branches, you know, that's not something that we've really taught it how to traverse yet. So I do think in that case, like, yeah, you pull it down into the CLI and you can say, hey, create me a, you know, if else flow, or like, here's my pseudocode, like, you know, translate that into a branching flow in the workflow.
Yeah, I think that would give me a little more confidence, especially in a team, in a collaborative environment where maybe I want someone to review what changes I'm going to make. Because then I can pull it, I can make the goals, but then I can just make a PR for it, and someone else can look and say, yeah, this looks good, let's ship it. Versus if we're just pushing automatically with MCP, then I may not know, we may not have that review step in place. Right, until that knows about a branching system in Knock.
Yeah, correct. Or the review would like have to happen in Knock, because there's one, I kind of did everything in the development environment, and so there is like a separate kind of promotion step that would have to happen to actually make any of what I did live in production, right? So I made it, saved the changes, committed them to development, and then if I do need to like to ship it, you know, basically there's another step that I didn't get into. So I don't know if that would like help you with the confidence problem, but
I think that would solve the problem as well.
Okay, I
just have some sort of review system to make sure that you know, if I'm a junior coming in here, I want to be sure I'm not going to break our marketing campaigns or
exactly.
Go on, Amy.
So I just wanted to bring up that someone in the chat had brought up. They say, I really like all of the observability features and things to prevent notification fatigue for users. A lot of tools are built for developers solely, and they're just about getting the messaging out there. But I like that this also helps product folks who want to look at the data and see how it does with users. Love this.
Awesome.
I wondered, what other best practices do you have, or like recommendations for, especially when we're talking about AI making decisions for us? to avoid notification fatigue and to, avoid low engagement
Oh
problems.
yeah, that's great. That's a great question. And something like, yeah, I wish we talked about that more. Like, because to your point, a lot of it is about the mechanics of it, and for
Mhm.
some people that's their main concern. But I think there's like a huge aspect of UX that's almost ignored in notifications. And we did this really deep dive into much larger companies and how they treat notifications. So if you look at something like LinkedIn, for example, or like a company like Duolingo, like these large B2C companies, they put a lot of thought and effort into kind of what they're sending and the methods that they give you to opt out, which I think is really important. And what Duolingo found was that basically, like, there was sort of a threshold of an amount of messages that you could send somebody before they opted out of the channel entirely. And right, if that's push or SMS, right, it's very hard to reactivate somebody who's turned off push notifications across your app, right? That's very difficult to get them back in there. I'd say almost impossible. And so that's why I think like preferences are really important, and providing people granular preferences and really thinking about, okay, what's going to be valuable to this person? And if it's not valuable, then I should provide them a really easy mechanism to opt out, so that they're not opting out of an entire channel, right? They're opting out of one workflow, a type of notification, right? Maybe I don't want to see comments, but or maybe I don't want to see them on this device, right? Because I think that's also part of it. Letting people really opt into the channel that's going to work for them and the individual types of notifications that they want to see is important. And then too, I think things like batching are really underrated. I think there's a lot of activity that happens, especially in like collaborative type applications, where I don't really need a message about each individual event. Maybe I want a summary. Maybe I want, to collect all of these things and get once a week. I want a roundup of all of the things that happen in a workspace or something like that. So really thinking about that too, where it's like individual notifications are on stuff like that, really likely to have somebody tune out. But if you can kind of collect them, it seems more valuable. Hey, you've got 6 comments on this one thing, come back in, is almost more valuable to somebody than 6 emails about individual comments. And I think more likely to reactivate them. So
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've seen apps transition through that depending on like activity in the user. So if you're using the app often, you'll get instant notifications for things that are happening. But if you're a little less active, you might get more roundups and say, "Hey, here's all the things you missed." Like I remember using Facebook ages and ages ago, and if I hadn't touched it in a month or two, my notifications were basically a newsfeed. It was like,
oh
oh,
yeah,
these people posted these 12 posts. This person posted a bunch, and they can click through and kind of see what's a little more important, rather than trying to surface all the data that you would more appropriately see if you're very active every day.
Yeah. I like that too. And I think and that's not something we have so I guess we sort of differentiate between a batch and a digest in this way. Like a batch is kind of a homogenous activity, right? The comments that were all on one asset, where a digest might be sort of a roundup of, different types of activities. Like you said, somebody posted this, somebody commented on these things, other people liked these resources. And sort of the way that we power that is, it's something I didn't get into either, but we have the ability to schedule workflow runs for people. So if you wanted to like create some sort of weekly digest feature, I actually did a demo of this with Tinybird, where we piped a bunch of the activity data in Collab.io into Tinybird. And then we schedule a workflow for like Friday at 5 that goes in and queries this endpoint and brings back a bunch of interesting things and, provides you a template. And that's part of that you can power with Knock. And you obviously like need part of your own system that's set up to query your data store or whatever and surface that back to Knock. But some cool stuff. And, that's something we see people wanting to do a lot as well.
How complex can your workflows be? Like, can workflows kick off other workflows, or would you rather have like a bigger workflow with just lots of branches in it?
That's a good question. So technically there aren't a lot of limitations. I believe there's like maybe a technical limitation around how many nested branches. And I want to say it's like 4 or 5 branch steps we could have. We do have a mechanism. Basically, I think it's in private beta right now, where there's another function node that would trigger another workflow. So we have that in the works, and people will often, we have a number of customers using that. And what we try and like counsel people to do is like a workflow should be kind of like a discrete logical unit, as much as that makes sense. Where one of the anti-patterns is where like I have a catch-all workflow with a bunch of branch steps that like serves a bunch of different use cases, where I'm like, I look at some property on the data payload and this is, oh, this type of action. And then, based on that, it goes down this branch and, I don't know, like has a whole separate set of templates and things like that. So that's kind of what we counsel people on. Like technically, I don't know that there is, like, other than the branching one, yeah, probably not a huge limitation. It's really up to you, like the organization and how they want to manage stuff too as well.
Yeah, I mean, once you start having logic branches in there, it's hard to stop people from programming and trying to build their own version of knock inside their workflow.
Yeah,
It's like,
for sure. And that is one of the things, like the branching stuff can get very complex very quickly. And that is almost one of those instances where, like, as developers, I think we tend to lean a lot towards code and be like, okay, cool. Well, maybe this would be easier to look at an JSON representation where, like, once you have a bunch of nested branches, almost the visual representation tends to help a little bit. Like it's easier to grok exactly what's happening when you see this nice branching workflow than trying to look through, like a bunch of nested if else statements or something like that. So I think there are like these advantages to having the visual layer that aren't always immediately apparent unless you're like doing something super complex like that.
what other types of like messaging outputs you do? Like, can you do like mobile push notifications?
Yep.
And whatnot? Like, could I use this for iOS or Android apps as well?
Yep. So we do, I mean, I would say we do pretty much all of them. Like, so we have a webhook step too. So if you wanted to generate, webhooks, you could do that. We also use that webhook step a lot if we don't support a native integration, like as long as it, you have an email provider that's not on our list of supported providers, you can do that. Push, we do push, and push, we have a bunch of mobile SDKs that actually make it a lot easier to manage the tokens and acquire those push tokens. So I think we've got pretty much an SDK per major mobile framework. So we've got like React Native, we've got Expo, Flutter, iOS, Android, obviously. Then basically we've got some, and I'm not as well versed in like mobile development, so I'll say what I think it is, but we've got this kind of like delegate class, if you will, that sort of handles a lot of the logic in acquiring and managing your push tokens. And then one of the other things that we do that's kind of cool is I guess there's like a problem. So let me rephrase that. I think what happens in a lot of other scenarios is there's a tendency with mobile to accumulate a lot of like expired push tokens that don't necessarily work. And then you have all these tokens in your database and you might, spin them up. And for one user, they might have, a token per device. But then as time goes on, you might accumulate additional mobile tokens for the device, one expires or whatever. And so we actually kind of handle deprecating those for you as we see them start to bounce. So like if a token, we send it a push notification with that token and it bounces, kind of handle removing that from the user's channel data for you so that you don't really need to worry about it, which is kind of a cool thing.
Cool. I like that. I think we have time for about one more question. So
Okay.
Amy, if you'd like to ask.
Sure. I always like to end with just what's coming next. Do you have any new or upcoming features that you're really excited about?
Yeah. We've got a bunch of stuff that we're working hard on. So like obviously the agent toolkit and the MCP stuff is really cool right now. It's in beta. And so we're just kind of working on, formalizing that, getting all of that stuff into a better position. But the two things that I think I'd call out are our guides feature, which is, again, like as I mentioned in the beginning, our goal here is to really expand the surface area like of addressable use cases that Knock can help you solve. And there's a whole layer of in-product messaging that I think is really underserved for developers right now. And what I mean by that is like we actually had one of our customers use the WebSocket infrastructure that powers the feed. And there are a couple layers to that too, right? So I just showed you the component. We also have hooks, and then we basically just have a vanilla JavaScript client so that you can kind of build whatever experience you want. And what we found was people were using that to trigger all sorts of other in-product messaging like banners and things like that. So we built a product specifically to serve that use case where you define a component directly in your app, and then Knock sort of becomes this headless CMS where you can trigger these in-product notifications. And I can say, I want to show this banner with this messaging from X date to Y date for this subsection of users. And then it looks really great because it's obviously just like a native component in your product, and then gives product people a place to sort of store and activate that messaging without needing to say, hey, engineer, I want to, can we add this banner in? And I will, here's a ticket to take it, put it on. Here's a ticket to take it out. And then the other thing that we're doubling down on as a part of that is like dynamic audiences. So we really want to be, friendlier to marketing teams. And part of that is having a really first-class dynamic audience builder. So I think both of those things really should get us pretty close to, being a developer first customer engagement platform, taking on some of the bigger players in that space. So definitely two things to watch out for.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a great demo.
Thank you for having me. This was absolutely a blast. I'm glad I got the agent toolkit stuff to work and caught my own silly oversight. So
you tempted the demo gods 3 times.
I did.
In one
I
demo,
did.
And it worked out.
And they only failed me
debugging.
once. Yeah. So I got there. That's what's important. Yeah. Cool.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I guess thanks to everyone else for hanging out in the chat and coming along to ask some questions. We've got another community session coming up next week on Wednesday, July 10th. This time we'll be with the V0 team doing V0 AMA. So, and ask me anything. So if you have any questions about what's coming new in V0 or anything about what's coming up next, feel free to come in and check that out. Until then, we'll see you all in the community.
Bye.